I tell ya, I've flown a lot of missions in my old girl, Bessie. That's my 1978 Grumman Ag Cat, for those not familiar with the finer points of agricultural aviation. We've dusted thousands of acres, fought off blights, and generally kept my family farm, Willow Creek, thriving for the better part of 3 decades. But I never ever thought Bessie would be instrumental in delivering a payload of what I can only describe as liquid justice, served piping hot, or rather room temperature and deeply aromatic. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because you are not going to believe how one woman, an HOA president with a helmet of lacquered blonde hair that could deflect small arms fire and the imperial ambitions of a pint-sized Napoleon, pushed a mild-mannered farmer like myself to new, and dare I say, spectacularly messy heights. This one's a doozy. It all started about 2 years ago when the Whispering Pines luxury estates development sprouted up like a particularly aggressive fungus on the parcel of land directly adjacent to my eastern fence line. Now, I'm not against progress, not really. My grandfather bought Willow Creek when it was nothing but scrub and optimism, and my father turned it into prime arable land. I inherited that legacy, along with a healthy respect for property lines and a general desire to be left alone. Whispering Pines, however, seemed to operate under a different set of principles, spearheaded by their newly elected HOA president, one Mrs. Karen Ainsworth. Karen drove a gleaming white Cadillac Escalade, the kind that looks like it's never seen a speck of mud, and usually sported expensive-looking athleisure wear that seemed more suited for a sterile yoga studio than the semi-rural environment she now inhabited. Her smile was tight, her eyes were constantly scanning for infractions, and her voice had that particular timbre of someone who's never been told no and wouldn't know what to do with it if she was. The first inkling I had that our definitions of neighborly might differ came about 3 months after the first wave of McMansions went up. I was out on my tractor, turning over the soil in the south field, the one that slopes gently upwards and offers a rather picturesque view of the rolling hills beyond, especially in late summer when the wheat is golden. As I crested the rise, I saw them. A whole production crew. Flashing lights, reflectors, a photographer contorting himself into odd positions. And a couple. A man in a linen suit looking deeply uncomfortable, and a woman in a flowing sundress laughing a little too hysterically, posing prettily against my antique McCormick Deering thresher, the one I keep under the old oak as a sort of monument to my granddad. And there, directing the whole circus with imperious waves of a manicured hand, was Karen Ainsworth, resplendent in a turquoise Lululemon ensemble that probably cost more than my monthly fuel bill. I'm not a confrontational man by nature. I prefer a quiet word, a reasonable discussion. So, I killed the tractor engine, hopped down, and ambled over, wiping grease from my hands onto an old rag. "Afternoon," I said, trying to keep my tone even. Bit of a surprise finding a fashion shoot in my field. Karen turned, her smile faltering for a microsecond before reasserting itself. Only now it had an edge of condescension. "Oh, hello," she chirped, as if I were a curious woodland creature. "We're just capturing some lifestyle shots for the Whispering Pines brochure. Your little farm makes such a charming backdrop, doesn't it?" So rustic. My little farm, my charming backdrop. I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. "Well, ma'am," I said, "this little farm is private property. And that thresher, it's a family heirloom. Usually, folks ask permission before they set up shop on someone else's land, especially for commercial purposes." Karen's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction. "Oh, don't be so stuffy. It's for the good of the community, enhancing property values, you know. A rising tide lifts all boats, even your quaint little rowboat." She gestured vaguely towards my farmhouse in the distance. The photographer looked awkward. The models suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting. I took a breath. "Be that as it may, Mrs. Ainsworth, I'd appreciate it if you'd pack up your equipment and restrict your community enhancement efforts to your own side of the fence line." Her smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of utter disbelief, well, as if I'd just suggested her prize-winning poodle was, in fact, a cleverly disguised badger. "Well, I never," she huffed. "Some people have no sense of community spirit." But to my surprise, they did start packing, albeit with much grumbling and pointed glares from Karen. I thought, naively, that might be the end of it. A minor misunderstanding, a boundary clearly, if not politely, established. Oh, how wrong I was. That was just the opening salvo in what would become the War of Willow Creek. The sheer audacity was breathtaking, but what followed was worse. She wasn't just using my land, she was trying to dictate what I did on it, from her side of the fence. The complaints started rolling in via passive-aggressive notes left in my mailbox, then official-looking HOA letters. My rooster, Barnaby, apparently crowed too early for the delicate sensibilities of Whispering Pines residents who'd moved to the countryside for peace and quiet, but apparently expected it to adhere to a 9 to -5 schedule. The smell of honest manure when I fertilized my fields was offensive. The sight of my irrigation equipment was unsightly. It was clear Karen Ainsworth viewed my farm not as a working agricultural enterprise, my livelihood, but as an uncooperative part of her meticulously curated landscape. The first time she truly overstepped beyond the initial photoshoot was about a month later. I was planning to clear a small, overgrown patch near our shared boundary line. It was choked with brambles and scrub, useless for planting, and frankly, a bit of an eyesore even to me. I'd hired a local guy with a brush hog to come in. The morning he was due, I found Karen standing ramrod straight on her side of the fence, arms crossed, tapping an expensive-looking loafer. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, her voice sharp enough to curdle milk, "I trust you are not intending to remove that delightful thicket?" Delightful thicket? It was a haven for snakes and ticks. "Morning, Mrs. Ainsworth. Just clearing out some undergrowth." She sniffed. "That undergrowth, as you so crudely put it, provides a vital visual buffer between your agricultural activities and our residences. Removing it would be detrimental to the aesthetic harmony of Whispering Pines." I blinked. "It's my land, ma'am. And it's a mess." She actually took a step towards the fence, peering over it. "The HOA covenants are quite clear about maintaining a certain standard of natural beauty. While your property isn't technically under our jurisdiction, any action you take that negatively impacts our residents' enjoyment of their homes could be problematic." The implied threat hung in the air, thick and unpleasant as diesel fumes. I told her, politely but firmly, that my land management practices were my own concern. She retreated, muttering about uncooperative elements and the decline of neighborly consideration. The brush hog came, did its job, and the patch was cleared. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from an HOA lawyer, citing some obscure county ordinance about visual blight and unneighborly landscaping, along with subtly threatening legal action if I didn't remediate the damage by replanting appropriate native shrubbery to restore her precious visual buffer. The audacity was galling. This wasn't just about a photo shoot anymore. This was about control. This was about her belief that her pristine artificial world should dictate terms to the real, working land that had been there for generations. My patience, a notoriously deep well, was beginning to show a muddy bottom. I started keeping a log. Every note, every letter, every sighting of a Whispering Pines resident wandering onto my property to walk their dog or enjoy the view, it all went into a dedicated binder, complete with dates, times, and photographs where possible. My old deer camera, usually set up to see what was raiding the corn, got repositioned to cover the main access point from their development onto my land. It wasn't long before I had a gallery of entitled dog walkers letting their purebred poodles poop on my hayfield, and even a couple of teenagers trying to have a bonfire near my dry timberline. Each time, I'd send a polite but firm note to the HOA, citing the date and often including a rather unflattering photo of the trespasser. Karen's responses, when they came, were dismissive. "Boys will be boys." Or, "Perhaps if your property were more clearly demarcated." Clearly demarcated? There was a 4-strand barbed wire fence that had been there for 50 years. It was like arguing with a beautifully coiffed brick wall. One of my old friends, Charlie, who'd served on a different HOA board in a town nearby before retiring, gave me some insight. These HOA presidents, some of them, he'd said over coffee, they get a taste of that little bit of power and it goes straight to their heads. They think they're queen of their own little cul-de-sac kingdom. Sounds like your Karen is a classic case. The only way to deal with them is with overwhelming, undeniable proof of their own nonsense, or by hitting them where their precious image hurts. That stuck with me. Image. Whispering Pines was all about image. Their slick brochures, their perfectly manicured common areas, their carefully constructed illusion of idyllic country living, minus the actual country parts, like rooster crows and manure. And my farm, in its authentic, sometimes messy reality, was a constant affront to that image unless it could be co-opted and sanitized for their marketing, like with that first photo shoot. The irony was richer than the loam in my best field. Karen wanted the aesthetic of a farm, the charming rural backdrop, but none of the reality. She wanted a movie set, not a working agricultural operation. And she clearly thought I was just some simple clodhopper she could bully into compliance. She'd gravely underestimated me. I might be a farmer, but I also had a pilot's license, a degree in agronomy with a minor in soil chemistry, and a very, very long memory. The gears in my head started to turn, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. If image was her game, perhaps image was the way to play it. The tipping point, the moment the last shred of my turn-the-other-cheek philosophy went up in a puff of indignant smoke, came during the annual Whispering Pines summer soiree. I wouldn't have known anything about it, except they decided once again that my property was theirs to utilize. This time, it wasn't just a small photo shoot crew. They had set up a series of large white event tents strung with fairy lights, perilously close to my prize-winning organic tomato patch. Worse, their caterers had parked a refrigerated truck squarely on the access lane I used to get Bessie from her hangar to my private airstrip, a strip of well-maintained turf I also used for larger equipment. I discovered this when I went to do my pre-flight checks for a scheduled early morning dusting of a neighbor's soybean field. There it was, a gleaming behemoth of a truck, blocking my way, its generator thrumming loudly. I walked over to the tent area. It was early, around 6 a.m., but a few frantic-looking people in catering uniforms were already bustling about. I found a harried woman with a clipboard. "Excuse me," I said, "but this truck is blocking my access road. I need to get my plane out." She barely looked at me. "Sorry, buddy. Talk to Mrs. Ainsworth." She said this was an overflow parking area. Mrs. Ainsworth, of course. I found her near one of the tents, directing two men who were struggling with a large floral arrangement. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit that looked wholly impractical for a field, even one that had been mown for an event. "Mrs. Ainsworth," I said, my voice tighter than I intended, "your caterer's truck is blocking my airstrip access. I have a flight scheduled." She turned, gave me a look that suggested I was something unpleasant she'd found on the sole of her shoe, and said, "Oh, for heaven's sake, can't it wait? We're in the middle of setting up for the soiree. It's a very important event for the community." I felt my blood pressure spike. "Ma'am, this is a working farm. I have contractual obligations. That truck needs to move now." She waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be so dramatic. I'm sure your little crop dusting jaunt can be rescheduled. The truck will be gone by noon, after the brunch service." "By noon? My contract was for a dawn spray, when the winds are calmest and the bees aren't active. To delay until noon would be unprofessional, possibly ineffective, and would tick off a long-standing client." This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was impacting my livelihood, my reputation. "Mrs. Ainsworth," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "that truck moves in the next 15 minutes or I'll have it towed, and then I'm calling the sheriff about trespassing and obstruction." Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare. This is for Whispering Pines." "This," I countered, gesturing around at my land, "is Willow Creek Farm. And you are once again trespassing and interfering with my business." For a moment, I thought she might actually explode. Her face went a rather alarming shade of puce that clashed horribly with her pantsuit. Then, one of the catering staff, probably sensing an impending catastrophe, hurried over and whispered something to her. With a final glare at me that could strip paint, she snapped, "Fine, move the wretched truck. But this is not over, Mr. Henderson. Your uncooperative attitude is becoming a serious nuisance." As I walked back to Bessie's hangar, the adrenaline began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Nuisance, was I? Uncooperative? She had no idea. Charlie's words echoed in my mind. Overwhelming, undeniable proof of their own nonsense, or by hitting them where their precious image hurts. The summer soiree. Her big, important event. An event being held, in part, on my land without my permission, featuring a truck that had blocked my access. an event dedicated to showcasing the luxury lifestyle of Whispering Pines. An image-conscious event, the germ of an idea, a truly audacious, gloriously messy idea, began to sprout. It involved Bessie, a specific kind of organic fertilizer I had in abundance, and a prevailing westerly wind. The plan forming in my mind was intricate, requiring careful timing and a deep understanding of aeronautics, meteorology, and Karen Ainsworth's ego. Oh, this was going to be good. This was going to be biblical. The following week was a blur of meticulous preparation, fueled by righteous indignation and an increasingly giddy sense of anticipation. My special project began with sourcing the star of the show, several 50-gallon drums of well-aged, thoroughly ripened liquid fish emulsion and seaweed fertilizer. Now, for those unfamiliar, organic fish emulsion is potent stuff. It's fantastic for your plants, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It also possesses an aroma that can only be described as seafaring docker's gym sock meats, forgotten sardine tin, amplified by a factor of 10. It's not harmful, not in the slightest, to humans or animals in diluted form, but it is profoundly, unforgettably pungent. I usually apply it heavily diluted with water, but for this particular application, I was considering a somewhat richer blend. Bessie's hopper could hold 150 gallons. I figured a 50-50 mix with water would provide sufficient coverage and an unforgettable olfactory experience. My son, David, who helps out on the farm when he's not at college studying mechanical engineering, caught me in the barn one evening, meticulously cleaning Bessie's spray nozzles with a level of attention I usually reserved for pre-season maintenance. "Big job coming up, Dad?" he asked, eyeing the drums of fish emulsion. I just grinned. "You could say that, son. A very special delivery." The smoking gun, as it were, that solidified the timing of my little operation came, ironically, from Karen herself. A few days after the soiree truck incident, another glossy Whispering Pines newsletter landed in my mailbox. They delivered them to all surrounding properties, presumably in an effort to passively recruit us into their vision of suburban bliss. This one trumpeted their next big community event, a picturesque picnic and professional photo shoot at Willow Creek Overlook. Willow Creek Overlook. That was my damn hill, the one with the antique thresher, the very same spot as their first unauthorized photo shoot. The newsletter proudly announced it would be held the following Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., capturing the beauty of our rustic environs for next year's promotional calendar. It even featured a small, heavily filtered photo of my oak tree and thresher, with future sight of Whispering Pines elegance superimposed in a swirly font. The sheer, unmitigated gall. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They were advertising their trespass. This wasn't just an invitation, it was an engraved invitation delivered by hubris itself. I circled the date on my calendar with a thick red marker. Saturday, 11 a.m., perfect. The prevailing winds in late summer around here usually picked up from the west-southwest around mid-morning, blowing directly from my main fields towards Willow Creek Overlook. I spent the next few days going through the motions of farming, but my mind was on aerial ballistics and odor dispersal patterns. I consulted my wind charts, checked the long-range forecast, sunny, with a gentle 10 to 15 miles per hour breeze from the WSW, chef's kiss, and did a few test flights over my back 40, practicing low-altitude passes and calculating drift with plain water in Bessie's tanks. I needed this to look like a plausible, if slightly misjudged, agricultural application, not an act of airborne aggression. Plausible deniability, however thin, was key. My property line with Whispering Pines ran along the eastern edge of my largest wheat field, which was due for a late-season foliar feed anyway. The overlook where they planned their shindig was a mere 100 yards past that fence. A slight overspray on a breezy day? Entirely conceivable for an old farmer in his vintage crop duster. I even called my lawyer, old Matthews, not to ask permission for what I was about to do. I knew what his answer to that would be, but to refresh my understanding of trespass laws and my rights as a landowner, just in case Karen decided to get litigious after the fact. He confirmed what I already knew. As long as they were on my property without permission, they had very little legal standing. He also chuckled when I vaguely alluded to discouraging future incursions. "Give 'em hell, John," he'd said. "Just don't tell me the details." The day before P-Day, Photoshoot, Payback Day, I carefully mixed my special concoction. 50 gallons of concentrated fish emulsion, 50 gallons of seaweed extract, and 50 gallons of water, all churned together in a dedicated tank to create a viscous, deeply brown redo and eye-wateringly fragrant slurry. The aroma alone in the mixing shed was enough to make my eyes water, and I'm used to farm smells. This was next level. This was artisanal vengeance. David wandered in, took one sniff, and his eyes widened. "Dad, what in the ever-loving heck is that? Are you trying to create a biological weapon?" I just winked. "Nope. Just a little something to help our neighbors appreciate the, full olfactory spectrum of rural living." He slowly backed out of the shed, shaking his head but grinning. "You're a madman, Dad. A complete madman. Can I watch from the hill?" I told him he probably wanted to be upwind, far upwind. That evening, I parked Bessie, fully loaded, in her hangar. I laid out my flight suit, checked my goggles, and felt a strange sense of calm. It was the calm of a man who had endured provocation after provocation, who had tried the reasonable route and been met with arrogance and disdain, and who was now about to deploy a solution so fitting, so perfectly tailored to the offense, it was almost poetic. Karen Ainsworth wanted a rustic backdrop. She was about to get one, in its most unvarnished, aromatic glory. Saturday dawned bright and clear, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. The forecast held true, a light but steady breeze whispered from the west, southwest, carrying the scent of hay and distant pines. It was, in a word, perfect. I had my usual breakfast, read the paper, and tried to act as if it were just another Saturday. But inside, a current of excited anticipation hummed. Around 10:30 a.m., I saw the first signs of activity over at Willow Creek Overlook. White SUVs and a couple of luxury sedans began pulling up along the edge of my property, not even bothering to stay on their side of the dilapidated, but still very present, fence line. Figures emerged, women in summer dresses, men in pastel shirts, and of course Karen Ainsworth, a vision in lemon-yellow linen, already gesturing and directing with the authority of a field marshal. I could see tripods being set up, a large picnic blanket spread out, and even a string quartet beginning to tune their instruments. A string quartet for a photo shoot on stolen land. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was almost beautiful in its awfulness. They were really leaning into the elegance theme. At precisely 10:55 a.m., I climbed into Bessie's cockpit. The familiar scent of avgas and old leather was comforting. I ran through my pre-flight checklist. The engine coughed, then roared to life with a satisfying rumble. This wasn't just a flight, this was a mission of malodorous emancipation. As I taxied Bessie out of the hangar and onto my private grass strip, I could see the Whispering Pines contingent looking over with mild curiosity. Probably thought I was just off to do some routine farm work. Little did they know, I took off smoothly, climbing to about 500 feet, heading west, away from them, as if I were heading to my far fields. I circled around, letting the engine warm up, getting a feel for the air currents. The wind was behaving exactly as predicted. From my vantage point, their little setup looked like an absurdly out-of-place garden party. They were all arranged now, smiling, posing, the photographer darting about. Karen was front and center naturally, holding a champagne flute, her blonde helmet gleaming in the sun. Oh, this was going to be rich, literally. I made my first pass, parallel to my fence line, well within my own property, dusting my wheat field with a fine, invisible mist of my special blend. Just a normal agricultural operation, nothing to see here. Then I banked for the second pass. This one would be a little closer to the fence line, still on my side, of course. But the wind, it can be tricky. As I approached the section of field directly upwind of their little soiree, I lined Bessie up. I could see them clearly now, their faces upturned, some even waving, perhaps thinking I was giving them a friendly flyby. Karen actually raised her champagne flute in a mock toast, the arrogance. I took a deep breath, held it, and as I drew perfectly abreast of their gathering, still a good 50 yards inside my property line, I opened the spray nozzles just a tad wider than strictly necessary for wheat. And then, I gave Bessie a little nudge with the rudder, just a tiny, almost imperceptible shift. The wind, That helpful, cooperative west-southwest zephyr did the rest. A fine, brown, atomized mist, carrying the concentrated essence of 1,000 forgotten tide pools and the ghosts of 10,000 vengeful sardines, drifted gracefully, inexorably, across the fence line and descended directly upon the picturesque picnic and professional photo shoot at Willow Creek Overlook. I didn't stick around to admire my handiwork up close, of course. I continued my dusting run down the length of my field, made a professional turn, and headed back to my airstrip, Bessie's hopper now significantly lighter. As I taxied back to the hangar, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. The wind, as they say, had shifted, and it was now carrying a very different kind of message to Whispering Pines. From the distant overlook, I could already hear the faintest sounds of, well, it wasn't the string quartet anymore. It sounded more like startled yelps and gagging. The immediate aftermath, as I later pieced together from various sources, including my son David, who had indeed found a very upwind vantage point with binoculars, was pure, unadulterated chaos. One moment, the Whispering Pines elite were sipping mimosas and nibbling on artisanal cheeses, radiating smug satisfaction. The next, they were engulfed in an invisible cloud of olfactory Armageddon. The first indication was a collective wrinkling of noses, then quizzical looks, rapidly escalating to expressions of profound disgust. The string quartet's rendition of Vivaldi faltered, then ceased altogether as violin bows clattered to the grass. Champagne flutes were dropped. People started coughing, gagging, waving their hands in front of their faces as if to ward off a physical assault by smell alone. Karen Ainsworth, resplendent in her lemon-yellow linen, was reportedly directly in the path of the densest part of the drift. Her perfectly coiffed hair, usually impervious to the elements, seemed to visibly wilt. Her expression, David recounted with considerable mirth, went from regal condescension to horrified disbelief, then to pure sputtering rage. The expensive picnic blanket, laden with delicate canapés and fruit tarts, received a thorough baptism. The models, who had been artfully lounging, sprang up as if goosed, looking far from picturesque. The photographer, who had been praising the authentic rural light, was last seen trying to shield his $1,000 camera lens while simultaneously trying not to inhale. It was, by all accounts, a scene of pandemonium. People were scrambling, tripping over picnic baskets and each other in their haste to escape the noxious cloud. The luxurious white SUVs and sedans became impromptu evacuation vehicles, doors flung open, engines revving. The prevailing sentiment was no longer elegance, but "get me out of this stink." I, meanwhile, had calmly parked Bessie in her hangar, closed the doors, and was hosing down my boots outside the barn, the picture of agricultural innocence. It wasn't long before I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway, moving far too fast. Sure enough, Karen Ainsworth's gleaming white Escalade screeched to a halt, and she burst out, her lemon linen now looking somewhat bedraggled and possibly stained. Her face was a mask of fury, her helmet of hair slightly askew. Two rather green-looking HOA board members trailed nervously behind her. "Henderson!" she shrieked, her voice several octaves higher than usual and cracking with emotion. "You did this! You deliberately sprayed us! We are drenched in poison!" I raised an eyebrow, feigning mild surprise. "Mrs. Ainsworth? What on earth is the matter? And poison? Goodness, no! That was just a bit of organic fish emulsion and seaweed fertilizer. Excellent for the soil, really. My wheat loves it." I gestured vaguely towards the field. "Bit of a breezy day, though. Sometimes the drift can be a little unpredictable with these older planes. Terribly sorry if any blew your way. Were you having some sort of get-together over there?" I kept my face perfectly neutral, a hint of neighborly concern in my voice. Karen looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. "Unpredictable drift? You flew right at us. You aimed that filth at us. This is assault. This is an environmental hazard." One of the board members behind her actually gagged again, covering his mouth. "Now, Karen," I said, using her first name for the first time, my tone still mild. "Let's not get hysterical. I was fertilizing my crops, on my land, as is my right. If your little party happened to be in the path of some minor, unfortunate overspray while you were, shall we say, enjoying the view from my property without permission, well, that's hardly my fault. Is it?" I paused, then added, I actually have some rather clear deer cam footage from this morning showing quite a few vehicles and a rather large gathering setting up camp well inside my fence line. Trespassing, I believe the legal term is. Sheriff Thompson takes a dim view of that, especially when it involves potential damage to agricultural land. Karen's jaw worked silently for a moment. The mention of the sheriff and trespassing seemed to deflate her slightly, though her eyes still blazed. This is an outrage, she sputtered. We were appreciating the natural beauty. You have ruined everything. Our clothes, the food, our photographer's equipment, it all reeks. Ah, I said, nodding sympathetically. Yes, fish emulsion does have a rather distinctive aroma. It fades after a day or two, especially with a good wash. Consider it an authentic, immersive agricultural experience. Free of charge. The sarcasm was laid on thick, but she was too incensed to fully appreciate its nuances, or perhaps too overwhelmed by the lingering bouquet of Bessie's payload. The two board members looked like they wanted the earth to swallow them. One of them, a Mr. Henderson, no relation thankfully, finally spoke up, his voice weak. Karen, perhaps we should just go. We can discuss this later. Karen shot him a venomous glare but seemed to realize she had no real leverage here. She was standing on my property, smelling like a trawler's bilge, accusing me of something I could plausibly deny while she herself was clearly in the wrong for trespassing. This isn't over, Henderson, she hissed, jabbing a finger in my direction. You will hear from our lawyers. The HOA will not stand for this. I look forward to it, I said pleasantly. Do give them my regards, and tell them to bring nose plugs. With a final, frustrated scream that was half human, half banshee, she spun on her heel, climbed back into her Escalade, and roared off down my driveway, leaving a cloud of dust and the lingering, piquant aroma of fishy justice in her wake. The two board members scurried after her in their own car, looking thoroughly defeated and faintly nauseous. I watched them go, then allowed myself a deep, satisfied chuckle that came all the way from my boots. The War of Willow Creek wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I felt I'd just won a very significant and very fragrant battle. The immediate effect was a glorious, almost deafening silence from the Whispering Pines HOA. No more passive-aggressive notes, no more imperious demands, no more impromptu photoshoots. It was as if a miasma of humility, or perhaps just residual fish emulsion, had settled over their pristine enclave. The great fertilizer fiasco of Willow Creek, as it quickly became known in local circles, thanks in no small part to my son David's gleeful recounting to anyone who would listen, had an impact far greater than just ruining one fancy picnic. Word spread like wildfire through the county. Some were scandalized, tut-tutting about neighborly disputes getting out of hand. But many more, especially those who had also endured the petty tyrannies of overzealous HOAs or the condescension of entitled newcomers, were privately and sometimes openly cheering. Old Man Hemlock, who ran the feed store, slapped me on the back and offered me a discount on my next order of actual non-weaponized fertilizer. Even Sheriff Thompson, when he casually dropped by a few days later to check on a report of an unusual odor, had a distinct twinkle in his eye. He listened to my carefully rehearsed explanation about unpredictable wind gusts and sensitive noses unfamiliar with organic farming practices with a commendably straight face, then spent a good 10 minutes admiring Bessie. As he was leaving, he paused and said, "You know, John, some folks move to the country expecting it to be a postcard, not a workplace. Sometimes they need a vivid reminder of the difference." He tipped his hat and left. Karen Ainsworth did, true to her word, have her lawyers send me a letter. It was a masterpiece of bluster and indignation, full of phrases like willful endangerment, malicious destruction of property, referring, I kid you not, to a cashmere throw that had apparently been a casualty, and infliction of emotional distress. It demanded a full apology, monetary compensation for damages, including dry cleaning bills and therapy for the traumatized string quartet, and a legally binding agreement that I would cease all aerial dissemination of noxious substances within a 5-mile radius of Whispering Pines. My lawyer, Matthews, had a field day with it. His response was short, pointed, and included copies of my deer cam footage, clearly showing the extent of their trespass. along with sworn affidavits from two other neighboring farmers who had experienced similar boundary confusions from Whispering Pines residents. He also politely inquired if Mrs. Ainsworth would be compensating me for the unauthorized commercial use of my property for their multiple photo shoots and the obstruction of my airstrip. We never heard back from Karen's lawyers on that particular set of demands. The real fallout, however, happened within the Whispering Pines HOA itself. Turns out, not everyone on their board was a Karen sycophant. The two unfortunate board members who had accompanied her to my farm that day, still presumably trying to air out their suits, began to raise some serious questions about her leadership, her judgment, and her rather cavalier attitude towards property law. The fiasco became a symbol of her overreach. Residents, who had perhaps initially been charmed by her take-charge attitude, started to grumble about the ridicule the community was now facing. The Whispering Pines brand, so carefully cultivated, was now irrevocably stained with the faint but persistent odor of fish. Within 3 months, there was an emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't privy to the details, of course, but the upshot was that Karen Ainsworth was encouraged to step down from her presidency for health reasons. The last I saw of her, she was supervising movers loading her belongings into a van, her Escalade already gone, her helmet of hair seemed slightly less structured, her reign of aromatic error was over. The new HOA president, a quiet retired engineer named Arthur Jenkins, actually came over to my farm about a week after taking office. He was a stark contrast to Karen: tweed jacket, sensible shoes, and a genuinely apologetic demeanor. He offered a formal apology on behalf of Whispering Pines for the past misunderstandings and assured me that they would be respecting property boundaries henceforth. He even asked if there was anything they could do to make amends. I told him all I ever wanted was to be a good neighbor and be treated as one in return. We shook hands. And you know what? Things actually improved. They put up a rather nice split-rail fence on their side of the boundary. The trespassing stopped. Barnaby the rooster still crows at dawn, but now it's just part of the accepted rural soundscape. Sometimes, when I'm flying Bessie over my fields, I see the residents of Whispering Pines out for walks, on their own paths, and they even wave. It's amazing what a little mutual respect, and perhaps the lingering threat of airborne organic justice can do. So, what do you think? Was Bessie's special delivery a bit over the top, or a perfectly seasoned dish of revenge? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've got your own tale of battling HOAzilla or an entitled neighbor, I'd love to hear it. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the front lines where the pavement ends and the real world begins. You never know what Bessie and I might get up to next.